With the power to change the way things went, what would you do? Personally, if I could time travel, I'd go watch the Council of Nicaea to see all the chaos that went down. Did you know that at Nicaea, St. Nicholas, literally Santa Claus, clocked a dude square in the face? I'd have to see that. After that, I'd probably go attend a bunch of concerts for which no footage exists. Maybe I'd go to Paris in 1913 and join the brawl at the premiere of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. And of course, I'd prevent Hitler from ever coming to power. You've got a moral responsibility to do so if you've got access to time travel, you know. Today we're talking a lot about time travel. Let's talk TIMESPINNER. I'm Juliet Necro, and I'm a goth trans dork who makes videos for other goth trans dorks. Thanks to everyone who enjoyed the marathon video. I'm glad you liked it. I'm happy to see my work be meaningful to other people too. This one's obviously much shorter than the marathon one, but I'd like to alternate between longer and shorter videos because I want to cover a variety of stuff, and sometimes you don't have 14,000 words to say about a subject. TIMESPINNER is a brutally under-discussed game. As of this writing, it has fewer than 3,000 reviews on Steam, and most of the people I've talked to about it haven't played it. I was initially drawn to it for the simple fact that it's an old-fashioned Metroidvania, and I'm a sucker for those. I'm like 99% certain that I literally just saw this game in the Steam store as a recommendation for me and picked it up no questions asked. That would be a very me in 2021 move if it's true. If you were raised by Castlevania Aria of Sorrow like I was, you'll love this game. It's practically the lost 4th Game Boy Advance Castlevania, but at a much higher resolution and with better sound quality. It's also got more of a science fantasy vibe as opposed to gothic horror, but whatever. From a gameplay and aesthetics perspective, this game's obviously on point. If your taste is anything like mine, you'll enjoy it purely for those reasons. However, the reason I decided I needed to do a video on this game was because it's got a lot more going on with its story than most Metroidvanias do, and that makes it right up my alley. Like I said last time, I love action games that also have a lot going on story-wise, so I see no reason to delay. Let's get into it. TIMESPINNER starts on the planet Winderia, among a tribe called the Kalens. They seem like ordinary people, but they have an incredible secret. The tribe has access to a device called the TIMESPINNER that lets members of the tribe, called Time Messengers, go back through time in order to warn the tribe of future danger. And it's looking like they're going to need one soon. Our heroine is Lunaeus, the latest of the Time Messengers. She's getting ready to depart from her home timeline, because Winderia has been colonized by Lakeem, a distant, resource-starved planet. Somehow, the Lakemi have become aware of the TIMESPINNER, and are searching the planet desperately for it. Lunaeus has been trained from birth for the specific purpose of stopping the Lakemi from ever finding out about the TIMESPINNER, according to a memory left behind by Lunaeus' mother, Selen. We need a new plan, I say. I can't risk using the TIMESPINNER now, with Lunaeus. We only have a few messengers left, and we can't train them fast enough. What we need is a new kind of time messenger. What do you have in mind? Undar asks. Our traditions have always been for the TIMESPINNER to only come back as far as necessary to keep the clans safe, so as not to distort history too much. We have no idea if time can withstand more than a small amount of change at a time, Thea says. I nod. But we must take a chance. I propose we train one time messenger to go back further, go into the past, prevent the Lakemi from ever learning about the TIMESPINNER if we can, do something that will keep them from ever becoming a problem. That's a huge change, Thea says. It will completely change our history. We don't even know if we will still exist. But it must be done, I say. The TIMESPINNER is all that matters. The Time Messengers are important to the Kalens, but the role necessarily comes with a lot of sacrifice. The Time Messenger will never be able to return to their original time, so the versions of their family and friends that they once knew will be lost forever. Elsewhere in Selen's memories, we can read stories of Time Messengers who had to give up spouses and children when crossing over to a new timeline. It's an unfathomable price to pay for the safety of one's people. Lunaeus is the latest to make this time jump. We'll return to talking about sacrifice later. For now, it's time to spend some time, or it would be. Just as Lunaeus is preparing for her time jump, the Emperor of Lakeem, Nuvius, arrives. He kills Selen, who is using her aura to power the TIMESPINNER. This destroys the device, and flings Lunaeus over to present-day Lakeem instead of back through time. Reasoning that she can't prevent the Leikimi from dominating Winderia, she'll instead just avenge her people by killing Emperor Nuvius. This is the first time that the theme of revenge appears in TIMESPINNER. Lunaeus is characterized throughout this game as extremely driven to stop Leikim and take revenge against the Emperor. Keep this in mind, since there are going to be some other characters who go through similar things, and this game's perspective on revenge is pretty interesting. Lunaeus finds the wheel of the TIMESPINNER, which allows her to stop time, leading to some fun Dio Brando platforming shenanigans. Traveling into the Leikimi capital of Varndegray, Lunaeus winds up finding a library. She's greeted by the librarian, who claims to enjoy her accent and exoticizes her for being from the colonies. He also asks her if her sponsor is on his way, implying that the Leikimi Empire's colonial subjects can't travel unaccompanied in the capital. Fucking gross. This game actually has a very interesting take on imperialism, and a much more nuanced one than a lot of video games. Video games are obviously no stranger to the evil empire as a trope. My go-to example is the Palamecian Empire from Final Fantasy II, who are just kind of inherently evil and have no nuance whatsoever, but that's obviously an extreme case. TIMESPINNER's take on imperialism is interesting, since it shows the Leikimi Empire trying to portray its actions as noble as opposed to barbaric. Since developing space travel technology in 928 AE, the Empire's benevolent reach has spread throughout the Urnea galaxy. Real empires did, and do, this all the time in the real world. In real life, empires often justify their presence as a favor to the colonial subjects. In these cases, they often appoint themselves as peacekeepers, or liberators, or as a civilizing force, when in reality they were getting up to horrific stuff in the name of greed for resources. Leikim is portrayed as a once resource-rich planet stripped bare by its occupants, so now they take to the stars looking for more planets to give the same treatment. Those planets' inhabitants be damned. The Leikimi's brand of imperialism is much more insidious than we typically see in games, because they paint a kind face on it to prevent the average person on Leikim from ever figuring out that their prosperity is purchased by blood on other planets. To them, it's spreading benevolent influence and trading, not imperialism. This explains why our librarian acts so weirdly towards Lunaeus. All the more reason to kill the Emperor and bring the system to a stop. After traveling deeper into the city, Lunaeus finds that the Emperor is blocked by a barrier, but she does find the spindle to the TIMESPINNER, and a replica of the frame that the Leikimi have constructed. Using the pieces she's collected plus the Leikimi frame, she creates a new time portal and jumps through. However, without calibration gears, she has no idea what time period she'll find herself in. It winds up being over 1,000 years in the past, long before any of the circumstances that Lunaeus knows. In the past, Leikim has a sister world. Both Leikim and the other world, Villette, orbit a gas giant, and the two moons are at war. Lunaeus winds up being taken in by a group of Villetian soldiers who have become trapped on Leikim, since the Leikimi control the portal between the two worlds. The first person Lunaeus meets is Nalist, who's the only person she confides that she's a time traveler to. Nalist is a kind and caring person, supporting Lunaeus on her quest by upgrading her orbs and other jewelry, enabling new spells and passives. It's also pretty notable that she took Lunaeus in and nursed her back to health, despite the fact that Lunaeus looks Leikimi to the Villetian characters. The other person that Lunaeus meets right off the bat is Haristel, the leader of the little squad of Villetian soldiers. She's the most committed to the war effort, the most dedicated to Villette, and has the biggest grudge against Leikim. In a lot of ways, she's a lot like Lunaeus, who's primarily animated by her desire for revenge against Leikim. And that's how she convinces Haristel that she's not a Leikimi spy. Haristel defines herself often by what she's fighting against, and by her loyalty to Villette, which is going to cause problems down the line. In the meantime, Nellist asks Lunaeus to go find her lost alchemy tools, which frees her up to explore the Leikim of the past. While she's out exploring, she finds Rameda, the squad's medic, and a man who's sick with the bleakness, a sickness that Villetians get when they're away from their home planet's atmosphere for too long. They start doing what they can to help the man, whose throat is swollen shut so he can't speak. Rameda also tells Lunaeus that the Leikimi originally came from Villette, but split off later, meaning that they probably also suffer from the bleakness. Leikim is basically a penal colony for Villette, as we'll see, which further complicates Lunaeus' mission, since the Leikim of this century is very, very different from the one in her own time. She also meets Sakis, the quartermaster for the Veletian unit that Lunaeus has found herself attached to. When Lunaeus eventually finds Nelist's alchemy tools, she also finds a set of twin pyramid sculptures. These sculptures allow her to warp between the different Symphony of the Night loading corridors on Leikeen, and to also hop back and forth between her own time and the time she's found herself in. When she grabs this item, she's greeted by a pair of demons. The demons tell her that they're fueled by the rage and lust for revenge that occupies Lunaeus' heart. They're also helping Leikeen in the war against Villet, because Queen Elana of Leikeen is a similar source of amusement and power to the demons. Queen Elana is full of the same hatred and rage as Lunaeus, which makes her start questioning the path that she's on. Does Lunaeus really want to be the person who'd make a deal with demons, like Queen Elana did? Hopefully not. Now Lunaeus can start hopping around time and doing Link to the Past / Metroid Prime 2 Echoes shit. She also starts doing quests for her new friends from Villet and getting to know them better. Haristel explains that Villet is what she calls a meritocracy of the magical. What this actually means is that Villet is a deeply segregated society. Those who demonstrate magical ability are whisked away to become the elite of their society, and Haristel claims that this is in order to, quote, help the worlds, end quote. It's a good time to remind you that one of the two worlds in question is currently fighting a war against the other. Nice help. Again, this game does better than a lot of video game storylines by complicating the two sides of a war. This isn't a game about a noble kingdom fighting against the evil empire. It's about two deeply flawed societies whose populations are convinced that they're in the right. Let me get ahead of a criticism here. I'm not saying that every story has to be a nuanced exploration of geopolitics and war. Some stories are served well by clear good and evil. In fact, I think ungraceful attempts to complicate a story with nuance can sometimes make them seem weaker. I really didn't like the B playthrough of Nier Replicant, for example. In the case of TIMESPINNER, however, I think this nuance works. This is a story about characters who think they live in a good and evil story a la a Fire Emblem game, waking up to the fact that this isn't true. Lunaeus is starting to realize that her course is wrong, because the demons have offered her aid even though they support her enemy, the Leikimi. The demons are enjoying watching the Veletians and Leikimi fight. They feed off of keeping them in a cycle of violence when the ordinary people of both worlds have more in common than they thought. In fact, the demons are the ones who created the portal between the two moons in the first place in order to create strife and chaos. You could even see the demons as sort of war profiteers, who benefit from the lack of solidarity between Leikimi and Villet against them. Haristel is going to take a long time to come around and start to see Leikimi in a more understanding light, but others are starting to change their mind. Rameda, who's treating the sick man Lunaeus found, observes that he has no magical ability like the other Veletians, and was abandoned by his squad while he was defending the portal to Villet. Our sick friend was used as cannon fodder by his own people. That should give you an idea of how Villet treats its non-magical population. As the only one who knows that Lunaeus is from the future, Nelist asks Lunaeus to go to the future and find out how the war ends. After some research, she finds that the Leikimi completely destroyed Villet. That's why the gas giant has a ring around it in the present, but not in the past. This is the end result of the demon-fueled vengeance that Lunaeus is starting to reject. What makes Lunaeus an interesting protagonist is that she struggles with the same thing as her antagonist in this time period. Both she herself and Elana have been tempted by the demons, but where Elana gave in to that temptation, leading to the creation of Leikimi as it is in Lunaeus' time, Lunaeus rejects it, and in fact banishes the very demons who tempted her towards vengeance. Lunaeus defeats the demons, and then confronts Queen Elana herself. After Lunaeus triumphs over her in battle, Elana comes to regret having made a pact with the demons. Her reasons for leading Leikimi in a rebellion against Villet were originally pure. She was a diplomat from Villet, who visited Queen Philia, the original leader of the Leikimi. Elana, you are naive if you think that allowing these Leikimi to believe they have truly escaped my ire by declaring some kind of independence will prevent eventual strife. The more powerful they think they are, the more likely they will initiate conflict. They are, after all, a world of criminals. However, I have no need to antagonize them directly. We are powerful, they are weak. If you truly think they will remain peaceful, I invite you to visit them. Go as an ambassador, see how they respond to diplomacy. You will see that it is hopeless, and when you return, I shall have prepared a strike force to remind them, and our citizens, who holds the power. Despite being in the employ of Volturilis, the king of Villet, Elana became sympathetic to the Lakimi cause, and even fell in love with Queen Philia. Philia went to Villette to try and convince Valterilis to allow the Lakimi to separate peacefully, but instead he ordered her execution, kicking off the war. Elana, no. You are a fool. Lakim belongs to me. You are but prisoners. Do not forget that, and do not expect to see your dear Philia again. She must serve as an example to those who would defy me. Emperor Truant Valterilis of United Villette. Elana was motivated by personal vengeance, spurred on by the demons. The desire to personally avenge her love caused her to write off every single being on Villette, leading to its destruction. Linnaeus' appearance in this time makes a big difference, as it allows Elana to come to her senses before doing something drastic. This leads me to another nice thing about this game, and that's the quality of its queer representation. Queen Elana and the former Queen Philia are hardly the only examples. Linnaeus herself is bisexual, and the Kalens are a tribe in which polyamory is considered the norm. It's a nice change of pace. Fantasy fiction allows us to create whatever worlds and cultures we want, but a lot of writers tend to just recreate the same kinds of relationships and marriage customs that have been the norm here on Earth. Even if you don't care about queer representation, and you should, you can at least admit that we're leaving potentially interesting stories unexplored here. That's not the end of it either. Over the course of doing side quests, Seikis and the sick man, Esham, wind up kindling a relationship with one another. Lastly, and most specially to me, after doing a sufficient number of side quests for her, Nellist confides in Linnaeus that she's a trans woman. It's a very sweet confessional scene that I think is worth showing you in full and reading out. Actually, Linnaeus, wait. Before you go, I have something else I want to tell you. Sure, Nell, you can tell me anything. First, I wanted to thank you again, really. You've done so much for us here. You're welcome, Nell. I also wanted to finish telling you about my time on Villette. I told you before that I didn't fit in with the army, but it wasn't just ideological differences. I was conscripted because all Villetian men are expected to serve, and that's what they said I was from the moment I was born. It didn't make sense to argue with them at the time. I had no idea that things could be different, though I desperately wanted them to be. But like so many things with Villette, I eventually realized that they were the ones who were wrong. When I left the army, I turned my life around. I decided to help people, not fight them. I reinvented myself, and I finally accepted the fact that I was a woman, embraced who I always had been. Oh, Nell, thank you for telling me, for trusting me. You're welcome. The others know too. I'm proud of my journey, but it can feel a little like confessing sometimes, if I really like who I'm telling. I want you to know, Nell, that this doesn't change how I feel about you. Good, that's good to hear. Nellist, you're one of the most amazing women I've ever met. The whole Villetian army couldn't take that away from you. But that's not why I think you're great. It's your desire to make the world better, for everyone, and your determination and skill to actually do it. I should let you work, but I'll be back later. Yes, of course. Take care, Nell. That's how it's done, baby. If you ever wonder how to write good queer representation, this is a good starting point. There's a lot of different kinds of people, instead of just having two characters kiss out of focus in the background or something in a way that's easy to edit out for queer-phobic markets. Also, the only character confirmed to be straight is Emperor Nuvius, and he's a possessive, misogynistic asshole. A lot of the reasons he's so awful is because he feels entitled to Selin, Linnaeus' mother, with whom he spent literally 3 nights ever, but claims possession of her anyway. And when he can't have her, he kills her. Not a very flattering view of straight people in this one, but y'all have been writing us as the villains in your fiction for forever now. It's time for a taste of your own medicine, I say. As a queer-coded villainess myself, I want to see more queer protagonists fighting straight-coded villains. Good stuff. Another thing that happens as you do side quests for the Villetian army squad is that they all gradually lose their faith in their homeworld. Rameda and Seikis' turnarounds both come from treating Esham, and seeing how he was left behind to die by the Villetian elite. Nellist was a doubter from the very beginning, but becomes more sure of her view once Linnaeus tells her about how Lakim ends up in the future. The toughest of these people to bring around is Haristel. She's the most ideologically committed to the war and to Villette, believing the propaganda much more than her comrades. Rameda tries to convince her, but it winds up requiring Linnaeus to go to the future and bring back records of war crimes committed by the Villetians. Her last side quest is to fight a mini-boss. There's a defector from the Veletians who's now a zealot for the Leikimi cause. In many ways, this defector, who's called Cantoran, is like a shadowy reflection of Haristel. He also fights with a very similar style to Elana, which makes sense. He's caught up in the same zealotry that Elana was. Unlike her, though, he doesn't realize the error of his ways, and dies at Lunaeus' hands. On the whole, I really like the way we get to see these characters unlearn the propaganda they grew up with. If you live in the United States, or Canada, or the UK, or pretty much any nation that is historically or currently engages in imperialism, your history classes were probably way more nice to your country than they should have been. I was already starting to unlearn a bit of it by the time I finished school and went to college, but the most important reason I finally got it all out of my brain was that I studied history in college. After that, I was a history teacher at a high school for 2 years. One of the variety of reasons that I left that life behind was that I found it so distressing that I was required to participate in that propaganda. I think it's really interesting that a game addresses how people can unlearn propaganda that they grew up with. It's not always easy to do, but it's an important thing that most people have to do at least some of. Some people never do, which is why we have chuds who complain that people are trying to, quote, change history, end quote, or that kids are being taught to hate their country. Unlearn your propaganda today. It's fun. I've never seen a game that had a historiographical debate in it, and that fucking rocks. Lunaeus also defeats the Maw, a weapon that the Leikimi used to destroy Villette originally. This saves Villette, but it does have the side effect of destroying the portal between the two moons, so that the Veletian army squad that Lunaeus has been working with are now stranded on Leikim. They're forced to make the best of this situation. They've essentially been put in a giant get-along sweater with the Leikimi by Lunaeus. So now that Elana's course has been changed and the Maw has been destroyed, how is present-day Leikim different? Not really, actually. The demons took direct control later. You can see a statue that used to be of Elana being replaced by one of a demon. The barriers protecting Nuvius are gone, and Lunaeus gains access to a science lab. Here she learns that the demons have been doing weird and creepy science experiments. It's finally time to confront the last of the demons in the form of Genza. He transforms into Selen in order to mess with Lunaeus, but she powers through him regardless. Now all that's left is Nuvius. Nuvius continues to insist that Selen and Lunaeus belong to him, having learned nothing. You've probably put it together by now that Lunaeus is actually Nuvius' daughter from that brief fling he had with Selen. What's refreshing, though, is that this doesn't make Lunaeus conflicted. He may be her father genetically, but he was certainly never part of her life, and now he wants to treat her like a Roman paterfamilias. She understandably wants nothing of it. After killing Nuvius, Lunaeus is presented with a choice. She can either choose to ascend the throne of Leikim, or return to the Leikim of the past and live among her new friends. I talked about video game endings before in the Shadow the Hedgehog video, but I think that this game has one of the most elegant examples of multiple endings I've ever seen. The choice you're making in Nuvius' throne room is whether Lunaeus feels more of a duty to her own time, or to her new friends in the past. She's already sacrificed the timeline she grew up in, so she's free to choose where to go from here. Neither ending is perfect. In the ending where she becomes Empress of Leikim, her friends wonder for the rest of their lives where she disappeared to, even as they focus on building a new society. In the other ending, the Leikim of the present day is left in chaos, and it's implied that it might still have demon problems in that timeline. But Lunaeus gets to be happy among her new family. I tend to fall on the side of going back to the past, but I can just as easily see how one could conclude that the Leikim of the present needs Lunaeus' guidance, and that the people of the past will manage themselves okay. Interestingly, though, that's not the only way that things can end. You can also go back to a few areas and find a few more pieces of the Timespinner for some more time journeys. This unlocks the other two endings. In these, Lunaeus can decide to make more time jumps to prevent different parts of the conflict from ever happening. In one case, she can take personal revenge and save her tribe by killing Nuvius before he became emperor and started looking for the Timespinner. Or she can travel back to Villette and kill Volturilis before he can kick off the war between Villette and Leikim by killing Philia. In both of these cases, something unexpected happens. Lunaeus has changed the timeline too much, and reality starts to unravel, and she finds herself in a dream world. The Sandman, a godlike being, is trying to rewrite reality in his own image now that Lunaeus has destroyed it. Lunaeus has spent a lot of time trying to find a solution that would only involve stopping others. Being a time spinner is primarily about sacrifice, and Lunaeus is a different kind of time messenger. Now she has to make the ultimate sacrifice, In order to set right what she's done, she has to stop the Sandman and restore reality. But it will come at a cost. After she defeats her godlike foe, Linnaeus takes the sands of time into herself and becomes the goddess of time. She resets the universe so that the changes she made are still in effect. If she killed Volturilis, then Queen Philia is alive, Eshem and Sakis still meet, and Villette and Lakim still have peace. If she kills the young Prince Nuvius, she uses her influence to cause the Veletians and Lakimi to lay down their arms and rebuild the world. But most of the people who are gone, like Philia, are still gone. In both cases, Linnaeus is forgotten by everyone she knows, including her only love, Nilist, and her own mother, Selen. Things work out better for the world in these endings, but Linnaeus is forgotten and cut off from the happiness that the people who used to know her share. Of these 4 endings, my favorite is killing present Nuvius and returning to the past. I appreciate that the secret endings are not categorically better than the ones you get for finishing the game normally, but they're definitely more dramatic. Linnaeus' story concerns sacrifice and revenge, with much more nuance than these topics typically get. There's no ending where Linnaeus doesn't sacrifice everything, since she already sacrifices her old life and her original timeline as soon as you finish the tutorial. Instead, the game lets you choose how Linnaeus will sacrifice for the sake of Villette, Lakim, and Winderia. I appreciate that there's no golden ending where everything perfectly works out okay. It makes the whole experience feel more poignant. There's also an interesting thing to learn here about revenge. This game never condemns Linnaeus for seeking revenge on Emperor Nuvius. He did kill her mother, to be fair. What it condemns is allowing the actions of an individual to color one's perceptions of their whole society. That was the mistake that Elana made at the urging of the demons in the original timeline. Volturilis wronged her, not every single being on Villette. Linnaeus triumphs instead because she overcomes the temptation to see every single Lakimi as Nuvius, and brings about peace between the moons in the process. I appreciate the nuance brought to this topic. A lot of revenge stories lack nuance, either portraying it as wholly good or completely unacceptable. This game certainly has the most nuanced and interesting story I've ever seen in a Metroidvania or platformer in general for that matter. I highly recommend you give it a play. It's really, really worth your time. Tune in again for a much longer video next time. I think you'll really like it. That's all for today. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to subscribe and you know the YouTube stuff by now. Traveling into the Lakimi capital of Varden... Traveling into the Lakimi capital of Varndegray